In the past, a soldier fought on the battlefield, but today in Northern Ireland, the battles take place in the streets of Ulster. Extremists on both sides of the conflict are united in their attacks on the army, but the British soldier must try to keep the peace and to tolerate attacks and abuse from all sides. But is an army that is trained for war justified in controlling and sometimes even fighting a civilian population? This question worried Trooper William Dugdale, who was stationed in Northern Ireland with the 16th Hussars. It led him to desert. Now, William Parfitt, the author of the book Trespass Under Arms, is on trial charged with incitement to disaffection. Yesterday, his defense counsel cast doubt on the claim that Parfitt persuaded Trooper Dugdale to desert the army.
You say you found Northern Ireland depressing.
I found the job depressing.
Just no doubt as thousands of others must have found it depressing.
I don't know.
But you're not telling us, are you, that you and possibly Trooper Fisk were the only soldiers in Northern Ireland who found your duties depressing?
A lot of the fellows didn't mind.
Only you and Trooper Fisk minded? You didn't bother any of your other colleagues that, to use your own words, the women and children hated you?
The Protestants were all right. It was mainly the Catholics.
And in 1972, how much time did you spend patrolling Protestant areas?
Not a lot.
It was mostly Catholic areas.
Mostly, and searching cars and that.
So virtually all British troops came in contact with Catholic women and children who hated you.
Yes, sir.
But only you and Trooper Fisk felt really depressed about it.
Well, it takes people different ways.
Indeed it does, Trooper Dugdale, depending on what influences they come in contact with.
Mr. Golding, may I just ask a question?
Of course, my lord.
Now, Trooper Dugdale, you've said that if you hadn't gone to the defendant's house on December the 30th, you wouldn't have deserted your regiment on January the 6th.
Yes, sir.
Well, then later you told the court that you went to the defendant's house with your mind made up. Now, which of these two inconsistent statements is correct?
Well, it wasn't like that, sir. I've told you.
But it must have been one or the other.
Well, I was half persuaded when I went. But Ron Fisk wasn't persuaded at all. He had no idea of deserting till after he'd seen Mr. Parfitt.
But unfortunately, Trooper Fisk isn't here to either confirm or deny that statement. So we have to confine ourselves to your evidence. But now, Trooper Dugdale, you say that you were half persuaded.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Please continue, Mr. Golding.
How old are you, Trooper Dugdale?
20, sir.
And when you told my learned friend that the accused opened your eyes, what did you mean?
Well, he showed us that what we were doing in Ireland was wrong.
And you believed him?
Yes, sir.
And was your decision to desert based on that belief?
Yes, sir.
Did anything else influence your decision?
No, sir. Just what he told us.
Thank you. Does your lordship wish to ask any other questions?
No, Mr. Golding. You may leave the witness box, Trooper Dugdale.
I call Major Robin Hughes.
Major Robin Hughes, please. Come this way, sir.
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the book in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Are you Major Robin Hughes?
I am.
And were you the company commander of A Squadron, 16th Hussars, at the time the regiment was stationed in Northern Ireland in 1972 and 73?
I was.
And were troopers William Dugdale and Ronald Fisk in your squadron at that time?
Until January the 6th, yes.
Thank you, Major. Now, how long have you been a regular serving officer in the British Army?
19 years.
Have you always been in a tank regiment?
No, I started as a gunner, then I went on various courses, and later transferred to the cavalry.
And what courses were these?
Gunnery course, general duties, then a rather more specialized course. It didn't have a name, really. Sort of general troop management. What makes a soldier tick, that sort of thing. Experimental it was, and very interesting.
What makes a soldier tick? Could you tell us about the lecturers on this course?
Yes, psychologists, personnel managers, all sorts of people. I must say it helped me a great deal, too. You can't know too much about what goes on inside a man's head. Of course, the Army is very keen to avoid putting round pegs into square holes. So that anything that helps us to understand the men better is frightfully useful.
Were there any other consequences of your having been on this course?
Yes, I think so. I've sat on quite a number of selection boards since then.
Anything else?
Well, nothing you can really put your finger on, except well, I felt much more competent when dealing with men, especially men with problems. I think I've had a fair amount of success. Mind you, I'm not trying to claim that I'm a trained psychologist or anything like that, but these particular courses are pretty thorough.
Thank you, Major. For how long altogether had you been Trooper Dugdale's company commander?
Nearly 10 months.
And what did you feel when he deserted?
Absolutely astounded.
Why?
Dugdale was an intelligent soldier, clean, well turned out. I thought he had a good future ahead of him.
Could you tell us more about that?
The men in his troop looked up to him, and in June '72 I made him up to acting Lance Corporal. He did the job well. I think I was right.
But what happened?
Well, I'm afraid he crossed swords with a squadron sergeant major, and I had to take the stripe away, regretfully.
Could you tell us more about Trooper Dugdale's career during those 10 months?
Well, there's nothing much to tell, really. He was up in front of me a couple of times. Once for being absent without leave while we were still in Londonderry. No, not Londonderry, while we were still in Durham. And then once returning to Camp Lade while we were still in Londonderry. I believe the AWOL in Durham was a genuine mistake.
AWOL?
Absent without leave, Mr. Golding.
Thank you, my lord.
But of course the other charge was far more serious. In Ireland, we had to keep a pretty close eye on where everybody was. He was only a couple of hours late, but I had to make an example.
And did he appear in front of you on any other occasion?
No.
Major Hughes, I'd be grateful if you could tell us a little more about Trooper Dugdale. You mentioned 3 minor upsets, but you did say as well you thought he had a good career in front of him. Now, for the benefit of his lordship and the jury, could you resolve these apparent contradictions?
Yes. Dugdale had a good mind. You only had to tell him something once.
My lord, this evidence of Dugdale's mind is quite irrelevant.
Is it? Mr. Golding, is this witness giving factual evidence or expert evidence?
My lord, I've called Major Hughes to give an expert opinion as to a soldier's worth and his prospects in the army.
Yes, well, I think the question of whether or not Dugdale was a good or reliable soldier or what his career prospects were are relevant. Let's get on.
Major Hughes?
If a man went right through his army career and never once fell foul of his superiors, well, I'd say he was a pretty unremarkable sort of chap. Negative, overcautious. Some of our most distinguished generals have tussled with the system in their time. It's not so much the mistake we look at, you see, but it's how the man responds.
And how did Trooper Dugdale respond?
Well, I thought. He was a bit sore about losing his stripe, and he didn't like being confined to barracks. But I felt pretty sure he'd be made up again before long.
Now, was there any other occasion, Major Hughes, when you had words with Trooper Dugdale?
Ah, you mean the book, Trespass Under Arms? Yes, Dugdale had a copy.
Yes.
It was a squadron sergeant major who told me about it. Apparently Dugdale had left it lying about in the barrack room. The men had been discussing it. There'd been 1 or 2 rows, I think. Anyway, the sergeant major got to hear about it.
And what did you do?
Caught him reading it, as a matter of fact. I asked him what it was. He told me, and I asked him if I could borrow it. I took it away with me.
And what did you think of this book?
A lot of damn rubbish. I think he was a fool to fill his head with that sort of stuff, and I told him so.
Thank you, Major Hughes.
And how did Trooper Dugdale react to these opinions of yours, Major?
React? And what do you mean, react?
Did he agree with your view of the book?
I didn't ask him.
No. And you didn't return the book either, did you? You kept it right up till the time he deserted.
Yes, that's right.
In fact, you confiscated the book.
I thought he was better off without it.
In case he should get ideas.
Something like that.
Did he give you ideas?
He gave me ideas what I should like to do to the author.
Did it make you feel you ought to get out of the army?
Good God, that piffle?
Oh, the book was piffle, was it? And yet you feared for Trooper Dugdale.
I wouldn't say feared. I just think that sort of seditious nonsense has no place in the barrack room. I'd have the man who wrote it locked up.
Major Hughes, do you think a truly seditious book could have sat unmolested in bookshops up and down the country for the past 8 years?
All I know is that the army has a hard job to do, and books like that make it a damn sight harder.
Major, I'd have thought it was one of the functions of the armed services to protect our right to read and publish all lawful books.
We hear more and more these days about so-called rights, and less about duty and discipline.
Well, you'd like to see some of our traditional freedoms curtailed, is that right? A bit more censorship of what we read and what we think. Confiscation of all unsuitable books. Major Hughes, Trooper Dugdale was 24 hours absent without leave in Durham. but you dismissed the charge. Why?
Because the squadron clerk had made his leave form out incorrectly.
A slip of the pen by the clerk, which Trooper Dugdale fully exploited. Now, surely he knew when he really had to be back in camp.
Whether he knew it or not, the fact remains that the clerk had made a mistake.
And 3 days CB in Ireland for a breach of discipline that normally warranted, what, 7 or even 14 days CB?
Every case is treated on its merits. There is no set punishment.
You expected great things of Trooper Dugdale, didn't you?
I thought he'd make a good soldier, yes.
Why him particularly?
Well, because he's the sort of man the modern army is looking for. Educated, intelligent. He doesn't take things at their face value.
You must have been very disappointed when he let you down so badly on January the 6th.
I don't blame him. I blame the man who corrupted him.
Major, we are here to decide whether anyone tried to corrupt this soldier. If you've reached your own conclusions, you must keep them to yourself.
Yes, I see. I'm sorry, my lord.
Now, you say Dugdale crossed swords with the squadron sergeant major. Could you tell us about that?
Well, it was a stupid business, really. Sergeant Major didn't like the way Dugdale kept things under the pillow on his bunk. Regulations state that everything has to be put away in the locker during the day.
By things, do you mean, in this case, a book?
Yes, that book.
And it wasn't under the pillow where the sergeant major probably would have seen it, but on the pillow where everyone could see it.
So it was said.
And when Dugdale was told to put the book in the locker, he said to the sergeant major, "Oh, my lord, my learned friend has a copy of the transcript."
Thank you, Mr. Lodderby.
Dugdale said to the sergeant major, "Don't be so bloody silly. You lot want to wake your ideas up." Is that how the conversation was reported to you?
Yes.
Rather disrespectful tone to take with a squadron sergeant major, isn't it?
I've never been sure in my mind what the Sergeant Major said to provoke those remarks.
Provoke, Major Hughes? Under what circumstances does an acting lance corporal say to a squadron sergeant major, "Don't be so bloody silly"?
He did lose his stripe over it.
He was lucky not to find himself in the cells, wasn't he? And yet you say he was sore about losing his stripe. What did he expect? Congratulations. And then went on to say, "I was pretty sure he'd be made up again before long." Was this optimistic opinion shared by the squadron sergeant major?
Dugdale made mistakes. We all know that. But he's the sort of man the modern army needs.
An educated, intelligent soldier. Officer material, perhaps.
Possibly.
His colleagues looked up to him, you said.
Yes.
A leader of men.
I thought so.
And yet, after a few hours' conversation with the defendant, your leader of men packs up the whole thing and decides to become a deserter.
It only goes to show what sort of a man Parfitt is. People like him are trained to break down morale and destroy careers. We know because he did it.
Major, please remember what I said. Go on, Mr. Lodderby.
We know nothing of the sort, Major Hughes. And the only people who can tell us are the jury. But what we do know is that your protege, your modern educated soldier, after being dealt with most leniently by you, had a bad fit of the sulks, forced himself on the accused, and then flitted off into the Irish Republic. Well, if he's the sort of man the modern army needs, Major, all I can say is I'm thankful we've got 2 other services. No more questions, my lord.
Major Hughes, when you say Trooper Dugdale is the sort of man the army needs, what do you mean?
I mean that he has many of the qualities we look for in a modern soldier. The fact that he could be corrupted and seduced away from his loyalty, I think has more to do with his age than anything else. Parfitt's a much older, more experienced man. He'd know how to influence a young fellow of 20. I mean, they're trained to do it, aren't they, these communists and anarchists?
Oh, my lord.
Major Hughes, do you say that you know the accused to be a communist and an anarchist?
I know the type, my lord.
That doesn't answer my question.
In that case, no, my lord. I don't know him to be an actual member.
Or have sympathies.
Oh, these chaps are always very clever at hiding their true colours.
But not from you, apparently. If you have evidence to support your statement that the accused is a trained corrupter, I think we ought to hear it. Do you have any evidence?
No, my lord.
Members of the jury, you will ignore the remarks this witness has made concerning the defendant's political views. They are completely without foundation. Mr. Golding.
I'm obliged, my lord, yes. Major Hughes, you think Trooper Dugdale was susceptible to influence?
Yes, I do.
Despite his undoubted good qualities, his youth was against him.
I've no doubt about it.
Thank you, Major Hughes.
You may leave the witness box, Major Hughes.
I call Mr. Joseph Fisk.
Joseph Fisk, please.
Come this way.
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the book in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Are you Mr. Joseph Fisk of 18 Gibraltar Road, Canning Town, London?
Yes.
And are you the father of Trooper Ronald Fisk, lately of the 16th Hussars?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Fisk, can you tell the court what sort of relationship you have with your son? How do the two of you get on together?
Oh, smashing. Ron and me was always very close, especially after his mother died.
And when did that happen?
About 3 years ago, she got knocked down by a car in the Barking Road.
And that must have come as a dreadful shock to you and your son.
Oh, it was terrible. Ron took it very bad. He used to be a bit of a tearaway, you know, willful. Couldn't do a thing with him. Then after the accident, he had a change of character. He quietened down a lot. And of course, he wanted to go in the army. Not my old regiment, he wanted to go into tanks. But he went with my blessing.
And did he make any friends in the army?
Oh, yeah, he always had lots of friends. Especially after the accident, he seemed to want to be with people, you know.
And was Trooper Dugdale a friend of his?
He only mentioned Dugdale's name once. I don't think they was friends, no.
And was your son happy in the army?
Yeah, very happy indeed.
Then how do you account for the events on January the 6th of this year?
I don't know. Search me.
Thank you, Mr. Fisk.
Did your son write letters to you, Mr. Fisk?
No, not really.
Does that mean no, not at all?
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, he wasn't much of a letter writer.
Mm-hmm. Had he been much of a writer at school?
No, not much, no.
Or much of a reader?
No, not much. He preferred doing things out of doors best.
Out of school, you mean?
Eh?
Your son didn't much care for school, did he?
What do you mean by that? What have you been digging up now?
Oh, his attendance record, Mr. Fisk. Not good, was it?
He always went back when I told him.
Yes, and it seems he had difficulty reading.
He could read, he wouldn't have been in the army otherwise, would he?
But he had difficulty.
He didn't care for it much, no.
I'd like the witness to see Exhibit 1, please. Now, Mr. Fisk, that is a work of political science written by the accused. In your opinion, could your son have read that book?
I don't reckon I could read it, let alone him.
Oh, thank you. So your son was a poor scholar and a frequent truant. Were you really so surprised, Mr. Fisk, when your son played truant on January the 6th of this year?
Yes, I was.
Mr. Fisk, would you say your son was extremely fond of his mother?
Yes.
Was she the only one who could really control him, would you say?
I wouldn't say that, no. He could get round her, but he couldn't get round me.
But as you said, he was profoundly affected by her death.
Well, what do you expect?
Oh, just that, Mr. Fisk. Because 6 weeks later he joined the army.
Yes, well, he wanted to get away from it. I can understand that.
Had he ever spoken to you about wanting to join the army?
No?
In fact, it came to you as a complete surprise, didn't it?
Just a bit, yes.
Yes, and I suggest that army life came as a complete surprise to your son.
What do you mean?
He was a willful young man, used to getting his own way with his mother, who suddenly finds himself having to face up to real discipline. In his school days, when he hadn't liked something, he just walked away from it. Well, I put it to you, Mr. Fisk, that your son didn't much like the army, so he fell back on the only solution he knew. He walked away.
You must be crazy.
Well, that's what he did. He ran away.
Yes, but not for that reason. He was got at.
Was he got at school, Mr. Fisk? Was there another Arthur Parfitt there whispering in his ear, telling him to play truant?
That could have been, yes.
Really? Who?
I don't know, anyone. Any one of the other boys.
Are you serious, Mr. Fisk?
Of course I'm serious.
Well, in that case, could we know the name of this young, evil-minded genius?
I don't know. Could have been anyone. There was over 40 kids in Ron's class.
Didn't you ever try to find out who it was?
Find out?
To help your son.
Crazy. How could you find out?
Well, if you tried hard enough, if you cared enough, you might have succeeded, if there really was someone.
Yes, well, I didn't.
Didn't care, Mr. Fisk?
Here, watch it. That's my son Ron you're talking about. He's all I've got left. Do you reckon I wouldn't care?
Well, what else can one think? You did nothing to help him.
Yeah, that's bloody liable, that is. I worked night and day for that boy.
Mr.
I
Fisk.
told him 100 times if he didn't go to school, he'd end up inside. And I bloody well told him...
Mr. Fisk, I will not have that language used in this court.
I'm sorry, sir, but Got me at it. You heard what you said, didn't you?
I accept your apology this time. Please continue.
I'm most grateful, my lord. So, Mr. Fisk, you told him he'd finish up inside, did you? In fact, you predicted what would happen.
It was just to warn him.
Well, you may not have been very successful as a disciplinarian, Mr. Fisk, but you were something of a prophet, weren't you? No more questions.
Do you wish to re-examine, Mr. Golding?
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Fisk, we've heard that your son occasionally played truant from school and that he wasn't particularly good at reading and writing. Well, I shan't waste the court's time by mentioning all the great men who've had a similar problem, from Shakespeare to Winston Churchill. But it might be helpful if you could tell us a little about your own school days. Were you a distinguished scholar?
Must be joking.
Did you ever find other things to do when you should have been at school?
You mean like playing truant? Yeah, once or twice.
In fact, were your school days very different from those of your son?
I don't think I learned as much, as a matter of fact.
Thank you. Mr. Fisk, could you tell us what you did between 1941 and 1946?
Yeah, I joined the army in 1941. Got sent to Burma. I was with the 14th Army all through that lot. I finished up Sergeant Major.
Were you wounded?
Once or twice, nothing much.
Anything else?
Got the military medal.
For what?
Well, they called it bravery. Our platoon cut off. We had to fight our way back to the line.
You make it sound very ordinary, Mr. Fisk. Were many people decorated in your regiment?
One or two, yeah.
One or two? Out of a whole regiment? And when you came home after the war, what did you do?
Well, there wasn't much to do. I done a bit of tutting. Started my own business. Scrap, army surplus, you know.
Did the business succeed?
I done all right.
So, despite a lack of enthusiasm for school, you served with distinction in the army and have since run a successful business. Now, do you know, Mr. Fisk, any reason why your son should not have done the same?
No, none at all. As he was got at. See, when youngsters get upset, they look to older people for help. But if you come up against a bad one like Parfit...
My lord, the witness has no grounds for making that statement.
Quite, Mr. Lotterby. Mr. Fisk, you are here to give factual evidence to tell us things that you know to be true, not to express your private opinions of the defendant.
Yeah, but I do know it to be true, sir.
Have you ever met the defendant?
No.
Have you ever had personal dealings with the defendant?
Over Ron, yes.
No, Mr. Fisk, not your son. You.
No.
Well, have you ever had proof that he wanted to harm you?
Not me, myself, personal, no.
In that case, your remarks are not admissible. Members of the jury will ignore what this witness has said about the defendant. His opinions are without foundation and should play no part in your assessment of the defendant's character or actions. Mr. Golding, if you've any further questions for this witness, I suggest you choose a different line.
I am obliged, my lord, but no further questions.
You may leave the box, Mr. Fisk.
That is the case for the prosecution, my lord.
I call the defendant, Arthur Charles Parfit.
The case of the Queen against Parfit will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.